The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. I am your co-host, JP John Poz from the two-man power trip of wrestling. Of course, I am joined by the star of the show, the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion. He is, of course, one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in the history of professional wrestling, the Games Master, the Taskmaster, the devil himself, Mr. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how are you doing today, sir?
Great, John. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. You know, a lot of chaos in the world out there and a lot of COVID, but doing pretty good despite all that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Now, interesting thing that our buddy Larry brought up to me a couple weeks ago, and I actually forgot to mention it to you when we were talking about World War III in 1995 and stuff. Do you remember when Hogan did that thing with the dirt sheets? Do you remember he had the dirt sheets and he lit them on fire, he threw them up and all that? Do you remember that?
Vaguely, but I do remember it. Yeah.
Why would he kind of? Just the thought that popped my head, and I was talking to Larry about. But why would Hogan mention like the dirt sheets? Why would he give credence to it?
I think it was maybe his ego, John, because they used to bash him pretty good.
Yep.
So maybe his ego got the better of him. And I'm like with you. He shouldn't have mentioned them. That's what, a lot of people will talk about Vince. Not ever, like the Road Warriors became the Legion of Doom, and everybody else got changed. Gang got changed. Everybody got changed. And as a wrestling person, I didn't like that. But in his mind, there was nothing before the WWF at the time. So he didn't want to give credence to anything. And I think, that when you give credence to something, if I didn't know what the dirt sheets were, and I see Hogan light them on the fire, first thing I'm going to do is get me one. I mean,
Yeah.
We're all creatures of habit. We don't want to be told no. And when someone says that's not good for you, the first thing we do is rush out and try it, So giving credence was not the smartest thing, I don't think, but I understand his frustration. Here's a guy that absolutely was the biggest star in the history of wrestling. And people are going to say, well, this and that. Okay. There were 3 towns running a night, sometimes 4 a night, just in WWF. They were on fire. And basically, it was him coming off that movie, them using Mr. T, because if you look at that first WrestleMania card, it was just an average garden card, except for the Hoopla Alley and Liberace and the June Taylor Dancers and Billy Martin and a host of others. He opened the world up to wrestling being cool, and Hogan was, at the time, the leader of the pack. So I understand where his frustrations could come in. It's like in baseball, this, in all sports. Philadelphia, they boo Hall of Famers, right?
Big time.
They booed Mike Schmidt, they booed Santa Claus. I mean, so I think, what this country loves to do is make heroes, tear them down, and see if they can rise back again. And the ones that have risen again, their careers have been stretched out. Look at Hogan. He came to Raw the other night. I thought about that. What was the first WrestleMania? 83?
85.
85. Okay. 95, 2005, 2015. So we're talking 36 years ago. That's before a lot of wrestling fans were born. And they're going to go back. That would be like if this year the Red Sox had Yastrzemski in the left field. Think about that. You know what I mean? That's when you start to retire at 85. So his attraction is still there. And to me, that's amazing. And Rick, too, and everybody else they had on the show. Is it the right thing to do? I understand what they're trying to do to kickstart it. And they kind of intermingled guys with them. But does it take away from the guys when they're doing Hogan's lines? What you're going to do in posing? I don't know. Do you? What do you think?
Kind of makes Hogan seem like he's a bigger deal than the guy that's imitating him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I think too. So, did they succeed in what they were doing? Only time will tell. If the ratings stay up, hopefully they will. And because this group of guys are the most talented of all times, and they deserve their place in the sun. They certainly do. I mean, they're hardworking guys. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a better crop of guys in a long time. And I don't know how much longer can they go back to the well. Will they be doing this 3 years from now? You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's crazy. They've been going to that well a lot. Too much.
yeah.
And today, speaking about Hulk Hogan being cool and everything else, WCW with the NWO totally revitalized his career, and he revitalized wrestling. The Babe Ruth of wrestling struck again and struck gold with the NWO, with you booking at the helm. So let's go back to 1997 WCW, but really NWO sold out January 25th, 1997 from Cedar Rapids, Iowa at the Five Seasons Center. The attendance only 5,120. The buy rate only a 0.5, which equates to about 170,000 buys, which was actually the worst of 1997. The tagline being "The world ain't big enough for the both of us," meaning the WCW and the NWO. Interesting thing here is WCW didn't usually run January pay-per-views. This was kind of the first one.
Yeah, and this was an experiment, John, and rightfully so for them to try it, because there was talk about splitting the company, having an NWO hour and a WCW hour. So I think that they tried. They were thinking out of the box. But I was going to ask you what the buy rate was, because I knew it was not good.
Yep.
And they boxed themselves in the corner, I thought, because they had invaded, right? Now, to get your own pay-per-view, if you have any sense at all, you know they're working with the company.
Yep.
It was presented by Turner, right? So I think it was a ballsy move. And I think that because they tried that, maybe they did themselves a favor by not jumping into something without sticking their toe in, because I think they thought the buy rate was going to be a lot bigger. And after this, they decided that they better go back to what they were doing that worked.
Yeah, because if you think about it, WCW is the promotion being invaded by the NWO. That was the cool part. Them having
Right.
their own promotion. And I know you're going to feud with WCW, but it's not going to be the same. It's going to be a little bit weak, because the whole thing is that they're the guys that are the invaders, the outsiders, the attackers, not WCW. WCW is the traditional company. So that's kind of the crux of it to me, was that I like the whole thought of it, but when you actually come down to it, it's like, well, they kind of need WCW and that promotion so they can kind of take them over.
Yeah, and the other thing is you have WCW guys on the card. Why would they? Who hired them? You know what I
Right.
mean? And it was hey, things were running good. I'm glad they tried it rather than jumping into, like I told you before, splitting it up. They saw that it didn't work. It didn't do that much harm, and I'm going to say they did okay money wise on the buy rate, even though it was only 170,000 people or buys. And I think they walked away being a lot smarter, knowing that it didn't work. Sometimes you learn from your mistakes rather than your successes.
And the interesting thing is, it's coming off of Starrcade '96, which is the match of the century. Hogan versus Piper did 350,000 buys. So I mean, that's a big dip down from Starrcade.
Yeah, almost a half, right?
Yep.
Almost half. So, yeah, I think it was one of those things. It looked really good on paper, but what you and I are bringing up now, maybe we didn't bring up then, which we should have.
Now, as far as doing the NWO sold out and naming it and everything else, is that Bischoff? Is that you? Who's kind of coming up with the brainchild behind sold out itself?
I think Eric uh, came up with the name, and I think Eric came up with the idea. But like I said, everybody thought it was a good idea at the time because, John, if we had split that into 2 different hours, it might have worked or it might have been the death of it. And they took the chance of putting it out there, and they were smart enough to say, oh, we're not going to do this again. Where a lot of people say, well, we'll try it again and we'll change it up a little. They were smart enough to see that it didn't work.
So the premise behind it I like, because if you think about it, you're almost telling the wrestling fans you have to pick WCW or pick the NWO. Thus, you would almost think to yourself, you almost forget, like, WWF is over here. It's like, well, I have to pick between WCW and NWO. I'm not picking over here. I'm picking between these two. Is that, like, in the the thick of things? Is that the real thought behind it? You pick those two promotions and you forget about WWF?
Well, I'll give you an example. In Florida, in other territories when they were territories, when usually when opposition would come in, the home territory would actually start another organization. So they would flood the market, and the town would take a dip because no one's going to promote three
Yep.
towns. So the home territory knew what was going to happen, and it ended up usually driving the opposition right out of business quickly. So I think that's what they were thinking. Like you hit it on the head. Well, we'll make it NWO and WCW and make WWE go away, but they weren't going away, and and he had the wherewithal to stay in there. So, because did they have a January show, John?
The Royal Rumble.
Okay, so maybe they took 170 buys away from the Royal Rumble.
Right.
So I can see the thought process going into it. They did have a history of what other people did, even though it was in the distant past. It had worked almost, I'd say, 99% of the time. So maybe that's what their thinking was. Hey, we'll weaken them from, just loading up our pay-per-views, and even if we take 170,000 buys from them, that's 170,000 buys they don't get.
So as far as the actual production itself, the way it's set up, it's very dark in there. It's very different. Doesn't look like a WCW show at all. Looks completely different. So it does look like an NWO show. Who's doing that? Is that Bischoff's doing? Is that Crockett? Is that not? It wouldn't be really Zane Breslov. I mean, he would be like the booker of the building. But who is doing the production? Maybe Neil Pruitt.
It was probably there's a name that never gets his recognition. Neil Pruitt was a very smart guy. But Keith Mitchell was the production guy. And Keith, I'm sure Keith and Neil got together and came up with that different look because you had to make it completely different. And if you look at it, it would look more like an ECW show than a WCW show.
Yep.
And I think they kind of lean towards it that way. Don't know for sure, but I mean, if you were going to go dark and dreary and different, the only other people in business at the time were ECW that was their patent. So another one that ECW pops up in history.
When you think about NWO and how cool they were and how awesome they were, and them getting their own show, and Bischoff's got more souls to buy, and all those great taglines and everything that goes involved with the NWO, why Cedar Rapids, Iowa? That doesn't scream NWO.
No, but it screams vast wasteland. You know what I mean? It isn't the glitz of Vegas. I think they were also, this was them trying to come up with just that question you ask, why there? It was like, why would anybody go there? Oh, it's their first one. It isn't a WCW town per se. And I think that's what the thought process was. I'm not sure because, like you said, Zay was booking the towns. But I think that they thought going to a smaller building like ECW did on their pay-per-views, that it would look more hardcore.
It definitely had a different vibe, a different feel, a different look to it for sure. And I guess Zane Bresloff, I know they booked the buildings in advance, but so you're saying you think he possibly booked it on like purposely for the NWO, or do you think he's just booking that building because it's going to be a January pay-per-view?
No, I think he booked it for the NWO. I think that they were smart enough to say, we don't know if we're going to draw 18,000 people. Let's make sure we fill a building.
Yep, I gotcha. And it's interesting, we're saying it's only 170,000 buys. It's okay, but it's the worst of '97 just because WCW was so hot, and obviously coming off of Starrcade, they were so hot. It was, I guess, in a certain sense, it's a little tiny bit of a disappointment just because if you look at the rest of the year, I mean, you did a lot better for the rest of the year for sure.
Right, right. And here's the other thing. That was one we didn't usually run, January. So they kind of stole one, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
usually it was your Clash of the Champions.
yeah. So it was, in some respects, I think it accomplished what they wanted, but it didn't overperform like they thought it was going to.
Yes. Now, as far as the NWO, when they come in, it's like, the cold open or whatever. They're driving to the building. It's bad weather outside, which could be another factor. And maybe the attendance, not, I mean, being good, but not great. Maybe the snowstorm or whatever, the bad weather outside maybe led to some of that. But the NWO comes in on like garbage trucks or whatever those big trucks are, the snow plows, the garbage trucks, the way they're coming in. That doesn't really scream NWO either. Do you agree, or you think that maybe it kind of does in a weird way?
In a weird way, I think it does because I think that Six Pac, Kevin, and Scott had a lot of influence in this one. And I think they were trying to think out of the box, and, the Four Horsemen were limos. They had a limo thing too, but they were looking at what would they do differently if it was theirs. It was almost like when the NWO arrived, and by this time they were not only the top heels, they were pretty close to being the top baby faces. Do you know what I mean? The people were screaming for them. And I think they always had a twinkle in their eye, like you're in on it. You know what I mean? Like, did you come here to see WCW or the NWO? It was like They were very smart how they positioned themselves. I've told you, I think the three of them were very, very smart guys. And I think it was their take, hey, let's do something that nobody's ever seen. And yet, do I think it had some merit of being NWO? Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. But you bring up a good point. Is it NWO? What else could they have come in on though? You know what I mean? Should they couldn't be coming in? I don't think on limos. They're kind of saying, "Hey, we're the outcast. The snowstorm's coming in. They're coming in on snow plows and garbage trucks." I think it got their point over to people that maybe took it as another layer for them to be cool.
It's interesting, just like certain things that they do. It's like, yes, that's cool, that's great. The presentation, everything about it. Even when they came in on the dump trucks and the snowplows, it's something different. But when they came off of it, when they were talking to the camera, when Hogan and Nash and Hall like cutting promos and stuff, I mean, they just have a cool vibe to them. It's like, this is different, this is edgy. Don't know what's going to happen. This is an unpredictable night. But as far as the actual like vibe of the show, I don't know. I feel like like a little bit of a disappointment, but in a weird way, I still liked it. When you're like putting this thing together, are you thinking like this is going to be an NWO dominated show, or are you thinking that
Yeah,
WCW needs to make a presence?
I think WCW needed to make a presence, but it was NWO sold out. You know what I mean? And it had to be an NWO show. Now we will go through the show, and you can see that it went too far.
Now, I'll just throw this out there now. What do you mean, like by too far? Because I can think of an instance, but what do you mean by?
We put things that the women and the Nick Patrick overdoing it, and a lot of things like that. Just things that it wasn't like everything they did before was cool because they were getting away with it. Now they're in power, and it isn't that they're getting away with anything. They're in power. They're doing this themselves.
Yeah, and I was immediately thinking of like the sexy biker chicks contest and stuff like that. Except for they weren't good looking; they were ugly. Wouldn't the NWO have all like hot chicks though? I that's the one thing I don't get. Why ugly chicks, and why was Bischoff like happy that they were ugly chicks? You know what I mean? It was weird.
Yeah, that part I never understood because I mean Kevin and Scott, two handsome guys. They both look incredible. Uh, they both come off as stars, and I never got that one either, John. I never got that. I think it was because it was somewhat of a parody. If I could put it in the terms that come closest, it's almost to me that this show was a parody, like the Four Horsemen parody. Do you feel that?
Yep, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that they were doing this tongue in cheek, and I think it bled over too. And when you do something for the first time, I don't know if you know what's going to come out of it when you've been in a place no one's been before.
Right. Makes sense. And it just seemed like that was just out of place because if it's the NWO and they're cool, they should have all like the Hawaiian Tropic bikini models or something. You know what I mean? They should all be good looking.
Right, and especially in that era, you know what I mean? And when they, later on when they would do interviews with some of the women, they were all that, what you said, models.
As far as the NWO itself, obviously, this is their show. This is their doing. You're going to have Bischoff and DiBiase as the two commentators. Obviously, guys that you wouldn't think of commentators, but they had many, many years of success in that role, and they both could do it well. What did you think about not having the traditional WCW announced crew and having Bischoff and DiBiase? Was that definitely needed, you think?
I think they were trying to make that as much NWO as they could, and if they had WCW announcers, I think it would taken away, and it would have been again going back to how are the announcers here when they work for WCW.
And obviously Bischoff is a very good announcer, and DiBiase had some a lot of experience actually in that role, so it worked to a certain extent. But it was just interesting having a quote unquote WCW pay per view and not having Tony Schiavone
Right,
on the call, and not having the Brain or Dusty. But I guess they kind of needed that to just ensure you that it's not a WCW show.
right, right.
Excuse me there. Now, as far as the actual show itself, you're going to start it off with Masahiro Chono of the NWO defeating Chris Jericho in a singles match. Interestingly enough, it's kind of NWO Japan, which got over huge and did so much money over there. What do you think about putting Chono in the NWO and really NWO Japan as well? Is that your call, their call? Who's making that call?
I think it was that they asked for it, I mean, and it was rightfully so because you mentioned, John, how much they drew. I don't think a lot of people in this country knew how much they drew over there. I mean, those Tokyo Dome shows, there were 40, 50,000 people there. NWO merchandise was selling like hotcakes. And it was a smart move. And putting Jono on was, he was one of their lead guys. And he fit that part too, especially in Japan with the long black leather jacket. And he had, to me, he was the first cool Japanese wrestler that was out of the Japanese mold. You know what I'm saying? When he had the sunglasses on and, he looked
And
like
that awesome
something out of
jacket, yeah.
he looked like something out of the movie Black Rain. Did you ever see that movie? About the
Yes, yep,
Japanese, yeah. Didn't he look like something out of Black Rain?
yep.
The bikers. So yeah, it was. I'm sure they asked to start a faction over there, and I'm sure they handpicked who they wanted. I don't think
And
we had any say, who's going to be in NWO Japan.
and he almost looks a little bit like the Matrix with that jacket and those
Yeah,
glasses. You like
yeah,
those guys, yeah.
yeah,
He was great worker
yeah.
all the way around. And interestingly enough, you said Nick Patrick was doing too much fooling around and too much this with Nick Patrick. He interferes in this match. He's the ref. He basically kind of cost Jericho this match.
Right, right. And I understand what they're trying to do because Chris and still is a huge star. Uh, they're looking for an out for him, but I think they could have done it different because, like I said, right off the bat, we have a referee interfering.
And we talked about that before with Jericho feuding with Nick Patrick and actually having matches with him and stuff. It's like kind of beneath him. I know Nick Patrick was a wrestler at one point, but it's kind of beneath Jericho to be feuding with a ref. But you saying that's kind of a little bit was his idea.
Yeah, it was. Chris has a great mind for the wrestling business. And I mean, he saw opportunities to get over that other guys would never have thought about. It worked for him with Nick Patrick. It actually was a very good deal for him. And, Nick had played his cards well during the time he was the NWO referee.
Which was at times very funny and
Yeah,
very comical. Like you said, sometimes it was a little bit overboard and too much, but at times, especially when at that one point when you guys would do NWO Saturday Night and he'd have the mask on and he'd
yeah,
tell the guy to hold on, and he'd beat the guy up, and then he would start the count.
yeah, yeah,
Some of it was some good stuff for sure.
yeah, yeah.
The next matchup, Big Bubba Rogers of the NWO defeats Hugh Morris of WCW with Jimmy Hart in a Mexican death match. Interesting that Bubba is in the NWO. I know Chono fits because of the Japan connection there, but Bubba, I don't know if he quite fits in the NWO.
I'm not sure if he did either, but he had a contract that rolled over Bubba was one of the greatest big men I've ever seen. And, they bought him because they thought they could use the Big Boss Man title. Then when they found out that they couldn't or got sued, I'm not sure it was a cease and desist letter that stopped that or they actually got sued. But then it was, Big Bubba Rogers. So uh, you don't want to put a guy like Bubba on the shelf because he could work with anybody. And they had a good match. And there's another guy that doesn't get his credit, Hugh Morris, good performer. So, again, you know what I've said about the NWO? My head, the NWO was Hogan, Nash, Hall, Kid, and for the Hispanic group, Conan. Other than that, it got too crowded.
Way too watered down,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, yeah.
The next matchup, Jeff Jarrett of WCW defeats Mr. Wall Street, aka VK Wall Street of the NWO. That's just another one. It's like, wow, does Mike Rotunda, aka Mr. Wall Street, aka VK Wall Street, aka Mike Wall Street, does he fit the NWO? I don't think so.
I don't think so because you got to remember during his WCW run, Mike was over with Steiner and Dr. Death as the Varsity Club. He had that every time you saw Rotunda come down the aisle, you thought of the Varsity Club. I don't think it worked. Mike is another guy that was a terrific worker that never got his due. But Mike should have been WCW and resorted back to being the wrestler with the singlet and, the varsity letter because he was a Syracuse athlete. And that was just a misplacement. That was the thing where you thought you could throw a shirt on a guy and automatically he'd get the rub from those guys. Yeah, he got the rub from those guys, but how much can you rub off those guys? And I think the more we did it, the weaker it made them.
Totally agree. The only thing that Big Bubba and Wall Street had going for them as far as the NWO was the ex WWF guys. I mean, that's like the only thing you can kind of hold on to as far as making them NWO, right? I mean, that's kind of why they're ex WWF guys, which kind of makes it seem like they could be in the NWO.
Yeah, it does. But to me, then, you know, it, let's go back to the night Hogan turned heel. In my head, this was a premeditated takeover. Hogan had come in, scouted the area, got close to the king, and said, "We're going to take this over, guys." Uh, it just, in my head again, and I am probably wrong, but I just don't think that you keep on putting guys in, it weakens the whole storyline too. That the original four guys were in this from the beginning. Why did these other guys come right away too? Why didn't they storm the ring the night Hogan dropped the leg in Daytona? Why didn't they come? Sometimes we in wrestling we start piling stuff on the storyline and we forget where the storyline started. I'm one that believes you need to know where the storyline started. And before you make a move, you better think how is this going to affect the original storyline and where it's going to go at the end.
Very true. Well said. You got to know. Yeah, it's just one of those things where like, Wall Street, Big Bubba, I don't know. And then another thing is Jeff Jarrett's kind of in the Four Horsemen at this point, kind of. What did you think about Jarrett and being in the Horsemen, and was it ever really designed for him to be an official member?
There was a lot of talk about that, and I think they never pulled the trigger on it because there was also the thought of her ending. So I think that kind of, again, one of those things that, to me, the Horsemen, JJ, Rick, Arn, Tully, and Barry, or, Ole, or Benoit, or Malenko. It just, you can't keep on, in my head, I may be wrong, you can't keep on interchangeable the four horsemen. You know what I mean? It's like in football, Montana to Rice. You know, this, I'll give a shout out to Tom Brady to Gronk. It isn't, Jimmy Galapagos to Gronk. It weakened them too, I think. The guys I mentioned made it work. The other ones, it was just like we're trying to push something in that didn't need to be pushed in. And when a guy came into the Four Horsemen, originally they made it a deal for him. I mean, it was a trial and tribulation to get in there. They'd really used to have to go through Arn. And if they went through the Hells of Fire with Arn, they were accepted. We made it kind of too easy and interchangeable. And that happens when things are rolling right. You think, oh, this is all I have to do is put this down. No, it ain't what all you have to do, put it down. You need to think about who these guys were, what made them special, and does this guy really fit in? It's no disparaging to Jared. God bless his soul. Kurt Hennig, the Horsemen were special. I mean, they were the NWO before the NWO. And we had two of those factions, and we kind of watered them both down at the end.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That's for sure. Now, the next match on the card, Buff Bagwell of the NWO defeats his former American male tag team partner, Scotty Riggs, in about a long match, about 14-minute match. But Buff Bagwell, the whole story was he turned on Riggs. He joined the NWO. I always thought that he oddly fit the NWO greatly just because of his attitude.
I was just going to say, I forgot about Buff. If someone else was going to be in the NWO, Buff fit the NWO. Buff was one of those guys with the smaller face, great body, could work, the top hat. He fit the NWO. And Buff, I always thought Buff was going to be the big superstar of the business. And Buff was, at this time, Buff was having some great matches. And there wasn't five guys in the business that looked as good as Buff at that time. And he fit the whole package of being an NWO member. The attitude, the smile, and he did the thing, the tongue-in-cheek stuff, you know what I mean? He was very, very good.
I always thought he fit them like a glove. When he turned on
Yeah.
Riggs, I was like, I don't know about this at first. And then he became Buff. And I was like, man, this guy, he just fits perfectly, his attitude. And he's legit really friends with Hall and Nash, in real life, they're buddies. So, that kind of fits too, that one of their buddies is joining the NWO. I don't know, for some reason, I just always enjoyed him, the laugh, the top hat,
Yeah.
the pose. It definitely fit the NWO and was great. He had so much charisma. Obviously something happened there. He just maybe couldn't put it all together, but he had all the tools. He was a 5-tool player for sure.
Yeah, and the thing about Buff, you could accept that Buff would turn pretty easily. I mean,
Yeah.
his character that he played was a guy that was going to do the best for himself. And hooking up with the NWO was a very good move for Buff. Like you said, he was a 5-tool player. And at this period, he was really on his game.
Yeah, he definitely had the charisma and everything going for him for sure. Now, next up is Scotty Norton. He defeats Diamond Dallas Page via countout. So it kept Page strong, but obviously, Norton gets the win here probably to keep him strong as well as he was going to be continuing to be a big star over in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But the whole thing was Wall Street comes down to give him the NWO. He thinks he's joining the NWO, tricks him, turns on him, boom, beats him, and he escapes through the crowd. And that's how he gets counted out. He didn't really get counted out like where he got beat up. He kind of escaped the NWO and gets counted out in a loss. Is that literally just to keep DDP strong that way, have him beat up the NWO, but also have Scotty Norton stay strong as well?
One of the few things the Japanese ever asked of me was to make sure I kept Norton strong. He was one of the big heels in Japan, and rightfully so. I mean, Scotty was the arm wrestling champion of the world, legitimate tough guy, worked Japan the way Japanese like it, and that's what they asked me to make sure Norton was kept in a good light. And this was a great out for Page too, to go through the people, because after that he'd be doing that quite a bit later on, going in and out through the people.
The original people's champion, as he likes to say, and he really was. That he had that moniker before The Rock.
Right.
And the thing is that I love about it too is he's going to be one of the first guys that says to the NWO, like he doesn't want to join the NWO. He's one of the. So I was saying DDP was the first guy to really kind of shun the NWO. He was really the first guy that kind of said to the NWO, basically, I don't want to be in the NWO. Yeah, exactly. That was kind of a way to get him over too. I mean, really kind of get him over.
Yeah, it did. It separated him from the pack.
And as far as him going through the crowd, is that something that you just wanted for that night, or was that to set the seeds and he's going to be doing that a lot going forward?
He was going to do that a lot because that was Page's idea. I mean, Page came up with some very good stuff. And that was his idea. I mean, I don't know that night if that was his idea to leave through the crowd, but I think it was. We all got together because of the situation, of the Norton situation. We couldn't, and we didn't want to beat Page. And I couldn't, like I said, the only thing they ever talked to me about was make sure Norton's taken care of.
As far as the next match, Scotty Steiner and Rick Steiner, the Steiner brothers, of course, of WCW, defeat the NWO, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, the Outsiders, for the WCW Tag Team Championship at a 15-minute match. That was just one of those shocker ones because Randy Anderson comes out of the crowd, kind of as the referee, kind of costing the match, and the Steiner brothers win the Tag Team Championships. What do you think about the Steiners going over the Outsiders here?
I mean, I think that was the pop of the show, don't you?
Yes.
And they worked well together, too. They worked well together. And then we kind of got one back for the team with Randy Anderson because we lost one with Nick. So I think it worked. I think it worked real well.
And the thing is,
nobody thought that on an NWO sold out pay-per-view that Hall and Nash were going to lose.
Yes. I was going to say that's the thing here is that the big guys of the NWO, the Outsiders, Hall and Nash, the guys that started it, end up getting the loss to the Steiners. So it really kind of was a shocker.
Yeah.
And Randy Anderson coming out of the crowd to do it, jumping the guardrail to do it was definitely a shocker as well.
Yes.
The next night on Nitro, as far as Randy Anderson is concerned, Eric Bischoff, in hilarious fashion, such great television, fires him in front of his wife and his kids and says, okay, the Outsiders did not lose the tag titles. That was, that was totally a screw job. Return the tag titles. So obviously, not the decision gets reversed, but the decision as far as them being the tag champs, Steiners have to return it to the Outsiders. And then Randy Anderson gets fired. Is that your idea? Because that was great TV.
We had to do something with Randy, and actually Randy suggested his wife and kids coming, and it worked perfectly. Like you said, it was great TV, and Eric played the vicious boss terrifically.
Always felt like Steiners and Outsiders did have some great chemistry. And if you want like believability as far as like, okay, Hall and Nash are dominant. Well, the Steiner brothers, I mean, they're dominant for years, so they can go head to head.
Yeah, and Rick and Kevin were very close, and they'd always have great matches. And who wouldn't? I know he's going to try the Steiner brothers back in those days. You know what I mean? So uh, you were going to have a good match with the Steiner brothers, whether you wanted to or not.
Yes, true. As far as the next match is concerned, Eddie Guerrero defeats 6 of the NWO in a ladder match for the WCW United States Championship. About 14-minute match, possibly match of the night, just because
Yeah,
these two are two of the best. What did you think about this?
I thought it was the biggest uh, swerve was the outsiders losing, but that was the match of the night. I mean, Eddie Guerrero and 6. How can you go wrong? Just put those names together. There's all kinds of things they can do, and they won't repeat anything. And they had a great, I think it was their both the first ladder match. And that's a hard match. I've never worked them, but I've seen enough of them to know that's a hard match. And they pulled that off tremendously. I've said this before. 6 doesn't get the recognition. Sean doesn't get the recognition he deserves. He's in the Hall of Fame twice. Once as the NWO and once as the Generation X, correct?
Yep.
Is there anybody else in 2 separate groups that were that powerful ever? No. He was a special guy and is a special guy. He could work with anybody. Let's go back to when he was the 1, 2, 3 kid. The matches he had with Scott Hall were perfect. Perfect. The story they told was perfect. So, how could he not have the best match with Eddie Guerrero, one of the greatest workers of all times?
Yeah. It's one of those things where like they're both great, and at that point, they're both almost underrated. And you knew it was going to be a great match, but that definitely my favorite match on the card. A great match. If I remember correctly, Meltzer rated it very, very high as well. Just to throw that out there, just to get the critical acclaim, of the Dirt Sheet guys as well. But I really think that 6, Sean Waltman, when Bischoff fired him, he had the neck injury and apparently tried to change his contract. But when he fired him and he went to DX, he is the one that got DX over. Triple H was kind of floundering. He was kind of losing it there. I mean, they had nothing with him as far as DX. Waltman from the NWO puts his name and stamp on DX, and boom, DX is a big act.
Not many people have ever said that, John, but the guys that have said that to me are smart to the wrestling business. You hit it on the head. DX wasn't going anywhere. Sean pulled them up out of the muck and brought them to the top. Without Sean, we would never even be talking about DX.
Totally agree. I always felt like that was a big misfire by Bischoff to let him go because, man, instant credibility to DX and to the WWE as soon as he came out. It was like, damn it, like that's a loss for WWE, a big loss.
Yeah, yeah. And you know why I said a long time ago when Hogan said to me, when things are going good, you can afford to make mistakes, but not too many. This was a big mistake.
Absolutely huge mistake letting Sean go. Even if he was injured, just don't let him go to WWF.
Right.
Anything to hold on to him. Big mistake. So next up is the main event: Hollywood Hogan versus the Giant, the NWO/WCW World Heavyweight Championship match. Leading to this, the Big Show, the Giant, wins World War III, but he's a member of the NWO. So it's one of those things where did you book it to have some controversy between him and Hogan? Did you book it to make NWO look even more dominant having him win World War III? Or is it like a mix of all the above?
Mix of all of the above. Yeah. And trying to get as much steam as I could on this pay per view, not knowing what was going to happen.
It's one of those things where it's like, wow, he wins World War III. Okay, World War III is for the number one contendership for the world title. So you're thinking to yourself, wow, the NWO holds all the cards. They hold all the power. You know what I mean? Like they even have the guy who's going to be next in line to face Hogan if they wanted to. But you just don't think that he would cash in and take that title shot But it was interesting with the tease. He didn't help Hogan against Piper at Starrcade. Hogan lost the match, and he was supposed to help him. Tell Hogan was pissed. Then he's saying that why can't he be the leader of the NWO if he wins the World Championship, which throws a rift into things. I just thought that was really well booked and really good writing because it made you intrigued because the NWO were this dominant force with him. They were unstoppable. Now that kind of throws a spoke into the wheel saying, wait a second, now they're infighting?
And there always is, you know what I mean? And if you go back in the history in big battles, there's always two generals wanting to go the different ways. You know, I mean, MacArthur and Douglas back in World War II and Eisenhower, all three of them saw it a different way, you know. And I think it just worked out in why wouldn't the young lion or the young silverback gorilla want to face the older silverback gorilla and be head of the pride? You know what I mean?
Yep. Totally agree. And it was perfectly done here because you almost thought to yourself, it's like, wow, the NWO is having a riff. You know, they're having a problem. Maybe this is where WCW can start gaining an advantage. So that was kind of just a cool little twist as a fan because, I'm like rooting for the NWO, but I'm like, damn it, like now there's a chink in the armor.
Yeah. And we wanted it not to get so WCW so far in that hole that we had buried them with 6 feet of dirt, maybe a foot and a half of dirt, but not, you can't make it that it's impossible to come back.
Thing about this is Hall and Nash lose, 6 loses. That's the big guns of the NWO right there. I mean, those are the guys, and they end up losing. So what they said is Hollywood is going to right the ship, and Bischoff and DiBiase keep talking about Hollywood is going to right the ship, and Hogan's going to win, and they're saying he's going to make everything right by the end of the night. That's kind of like just a cool little thing that Hollywood will make everything all good.
Yeah. Santa's coming.
Yeah. So really, the match kind of ends in a no contest. Really, there's really no winner. But the thing is, and I know some people liked it, some people may not. I just thought it was funny because, and this is the part where with Nick Patrick again, we said it was a little bit overkill. So the Giant has him beat for the chokeslam 1, 2, and he's gonna fake the neck injury again, and he's gonna hold his arms down, and Hogan's dead and done. What's the kind of the thought process here? A little bit of goofiness.
Yeah, but it was to me a little bit of goofiness, but you knew it was coming. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because it was the NWO. You knew. And the other thing is, if you followed wrestling, you knew Hogan wasn't going to lose 2 pay-per-views back to back.
Yep.
You know?
You weren't going to lose Piper and then lose to the Giant.
Yeah. So I think it was done properly. I think all over the show also showed this to the dressing room. That was an NWO show, and the three guys, and including Hogan, the 4 guys who were driving forces, who were the founding family of the NWO, 3 of them did jobs, and 1 came close to doing it. So it sent the message to the dressing room about these guys don't do jobs. I've always said that's bullshit, and they knew when to do a job at the right time. They just didn't do jobs for the sake of doing jobs, or the sake of someone not being able to come up with a finish that fit in for them.
Yep, for sure. And this is one of those pay-per-views where you think that those guys wouldn't do the job. You know what I mean? Like they would be the dominant guys on the show.
Right. And I think, I said it was an experiment. We did 170,000 buys. It was to bite into Vince. Maybe with those 3 guys doing the job and Hogan doing what he did, maybe if we had another one and we had different guys from WCW or even brought in baby faces from Japan carry the New Japan WCW banner, we would have drawn a little more. But they did their job to do it right, and they did a great job.
And the thing is that okay, Hogan, doesn't win and everything else, but at the end he's going to nail the Giant with the guitar. The NWO is kind of going to be on top, even though Hogan necessarily doesn't really win the match. But thus meaning the Giants out of the NWO. Holly going to be again christened or rechristened, the leader of the NWO, and it shows the Giant where the power lies, brother.
Right, right, right. It puts the pup in his place.
The thing is with that, which I thought was cool, being like an NWO fan, it's like everything kind of went wrong for them, but in the end, they do kind of show their stuff because of power and numbers.
Yeah, and they limp out of there with their hands up. So, yeah. And I mean, I think with those guys doing the job, it sparked the next pay per views where, hey, if these guys got beat on their own pay per view, they may get beat on a WCW pay per view. So they did the right thing. Everyone.
Yeah. And the thing is, like Hogan comes off looking like the biggest, chicken shit heel, but he got his boys behind him and they beat up the Giant. They took him out. He's still in control. You know what I mean? He's still Hollywood, and everyone still hates him. They want to get that title off of him.
Yep. So I think it worked well for the night. I think it worked well.
In certain aspects, a lot of people say controversial pay-per-view just because it was different. It was something else. It didn't do the numbers that people thought it was going to do, and they thought the NWO was going to kill it. Kind of, what did you think overall just of the show? Like, did it was success, not a success? Kind of just give me your thoughts on that.
I think it was an experiment that needed to be tried. If they were going to do it again, we would have had to take a lot more time from that show to the next year to devise how to make it better. You couldn't ask for anybody else to do those jobs those guys did on their own pay per view. And it elevated WCW with the Steiners winning, Six losing. And I think this helped the rest of the pay per views because those guys lost.
Totally agree. And the thing is, if you look at it, NWO wins 4 matches, even though one of them's by countout. So it's almost like they win 3. But WCW wins 3 matches, and then the no contest in the end of the main event. Then the NWO limps out, like you said, on top, with kind of Hogan still being the champion, but not looking as strong. So it definitely comes off as WCW does have a chance in all this after the NWO dominated them for months.
Right.
So really, to me, I liked it. It's a good pay per view, but so many people, and there's so many kind of negative response about the pay per view. I always kind of say, I guess maybe it isn't what they thought it was going to be, with the girls, and maybe some people didn't like the dump trucks, but I didn't think it's as bad as it was received by a lot of the critics out there.
I don't think it was as bad as people, like you said, perceived it. But here's the thing: they had set the bar so high. The NWO,
Yep.
people were looking for something really glitzy. I think lights coming from LA, Vegas, or New York, or something like that. Yet these guys who were the invaders came out in a whole different setting, and it should have been that way. And I think we stole something from ECW's production on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you look back, it's a lot better show than you and I thought it was, as
Yep.
we've gone over it. So it served its purpose because the rest of the year, the pay per views did great business.
Yes, that's for sure. Big business. As you go through after this and go through Nitro and stuff, the Giant is still there. Him and Luger are going to feud with the Outsiders for the tag titles. But really, the big thing is the Hogan Piper rematch at Super Brawl. Hogan's going to get his win back, but that's a big build, and that's going to be a big pay per view. Obviously, talk about it another time, but that's what it is. Hogan Piper rematch is the build.
Right.
Now, as far as some plugs, you can go to prowrestlingtees.com, type in Kevin Sullivan, check out his beautiful Pro Wrestling Tees store. You can also go to doublehell.com. That is Double Hell Wrestling T-shirts. Kevin's got an array of shirts on there for you to check out as well. I think that those guys do a hell of a job, and he's got some really nice T-shirts over there. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. You can follow Kevin on Instagram at Taskmaster Talks. Kevin, anything else going on?
No, that's about it, John. I'm going to Southwest Fury in February. They've really taken off. I mean, they got a array of talent. Andrew Anderson, Charlie Haas, Mark Henry's going to be there. Teddy Long is there. They got a great uh, talent there, and I'm very interested to see what they're doing. And you can catch them on Hannibal podcast too.
Yes, Hannibal TV. If you go to YouTube, he's all over there. He's dominant. 234,000 subscribers and going strong. So definitely check out Hannibal TV. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. We'll see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.